My name is Doreen Bilsland. I come from Norwich, England. And when the war began, I was 7. And when our city was blitzed, I was 10.
My grandmother spent most of her childhood during World War II. She lived in Norwich, England, which is on the North Sea, north of Cambridge. Germany began bombing Norwich in 1942. This became known as the Norwich Blitz.
Norwich was a beautiful old medieval city. It had its own Norman castle on a mound, beautiful cathedral, and Hitler wanted to destroy it.
There were many precautions that England took before the Blitz began. People were to build Anderson shelters in their backyards so when the sirens went off, they would have a safe place to go. They would cover up these Anderson shelters with plants to make it look like a garden so the Germans wouldn't bomb them. My grandmother, however, could not have one of these Anderson shelters because her house was also a bakery and there wasn't any room in their backyard. So instead, they would have to pile into the neighbors' shelters or the city street shelters to stay safe. A lot of times, the sirens would go off during the school day, so they had to build air raid shelters underneath the schools for all the kids to pile in during the day. Sometimes they would be there for many hours, so they would have to recite their spelling words and their times tables and try to continue on with a normal day of school. Each citizen was required to carry a gas mask with them at all times. This is because the government thought that the Nazis were going to drop bombs full of poisonous gas on the cities. And the little kids used to get Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse gas masks just to make it a little less scary for them. People also had to put blackouts over their windows at nighttime. Some people made them, some people used curtains, just anything that would cover up the windows and not let any light get out. If they didn't do this, they would be fined heavily. The whole purpose was to make it difficult for the Germans to bomb them at night. Even though England had made all of these preparations for the bombs, the people of Norwich didn't really pay attention to it all that much. They thought that the Germans just wanted to bomb London and that they would leave them alone. They were right for a while until one night when the bombs actually started to drop.
On that particular night, I was at my little girlfriend's house, and we were in bed asleep. The siren had sounded, nobody cared. And then all of a sudden, the bombs started to drop.
The beginning and the worst of the Norwich Blitz happened on 2 nights, April 27th and April 29th, 1942. Hitler sent 300 to 400 bombers over to destroy Norwich. Over 230 people died on these 2 nights alone. The city was then bombed very frequently for years after that. These raids caused mass destruction throughout the city. Buildings were completely demolished. Norwich was just a pile of rubble. Many innocent people lost their lives to these bombings. Some people had some pretty close calls, including my grandmother.
One night when the siren went, fortunately, we went across the street to a neighbour's shelter. If we hadn't been in that shelter, I think we'd all been killed, because a bomb dropped at the bottom of our yard, and the blast would have killed us, or the flying debris. And one side of the house was damaged badly, but we lived in it while they repaired it.
As you can imagine, this is not the only scary thing that happened to her throughout the war. There were many times where she got very lucky.
One time when there was a raid, we didn't have a chance to get out. We got under the table. My mother laid on the top of me, and my little 5-year-old brother was beside us, and my sister, my older sister, laid on top of him. And the window casement fell on the table, and my mother thought the whole house was on top of us, and she started screaming, "The whole house is on top of us."
Bombs weren't the only thing to be scared of during this time. The people also had to watch out for strafing runs. A strafing run was when the Nazis would fire bullets from the airplanes all over the city.
Sometimes on very cloudy days, the Germans could fly under the radar and we wouldn't be warned. And this particular day, they were on a strafing run. And my little brother, 5 years old, was in the backyard playing. And if it hadn't been for one of the workmen who was working on our house, pulling him into the passageway, he would have been killed. And we had a few bullets in the side of our house.
Even though there was a war going on all around the children of England, they still managed to have fun.
We had fun when we were kids, naturally. We realized it was bad, but, you know, when it's all over, you think it's the end. And we used to play on the bomb buildings. We used to go hunt for treasures. It could have been dangerous, but we still had a lot of fun doing it.
This is a picture of my great-grandfather being addressed by the king when he was getting his rifle to be in the Home Guard. My grandmother has a lot of funny stories about her father from during this time.
My father was a very brave little man. He always used to say that if you could hear the bomb whistling, it wasn't for you. And that made us feel very happy. But anyway, one time a German plane was coming over very low, and my father was in the Home Guard, and he had a standard issue of an infantry rifle. And we had a wall between our house and the one next door. He climbed up on the wall and started to shoot at the plane. He says, you bugger, I'll get you.
There was also a lot of pop culture during this time. It was the era of the big bands. Glenn Miller's band was the #1 band for many years. Moonlight Serenade was his most popular piece. Some other popular singers of the time were Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey, and Harry James. People also liked to go to the movies during this time. Some popular movies were Blood and Sand, Lassie Come Home, and Flicka. The torment finally stopped on May 8, 1945, when the war in Europe finally ended. My grandmother described VE Day like New York City on New Year's Eve. Everybody was screaming and having a great time celebrating the end of the war. My grandmother will never forget the events that happened to her during World War II.